Hey, it's KR talking about how fiction differs from RPGs. And this comes up specifically because we often see films or read, fantasy novels or short stories, or they can be just a modern type setting, but we read them, and as we're reading, like, this would make a great storyline or encounter or, even a campaign setting for an RPG, a fantasy RPG. And it's great to be inspired by that. And characters from there, you can translate them into how the characters work in whatever system you're running. But I think, you have to remember when you're doing this that fiction is inherently different than the narrative that emerges in an RPG setting. So I'm going to list 8 reasons why this occurred. There's many more, but I just thought up these 8 and talk about each in terms of just keeping in mind that because it's great to adapt something that you really like. This came up because I adapted the basic story outline and themes of Apocalypse Now, the film, which of course is based on the famous Joseph Conrad novella, Heart of Darkness. I did it for my campaign, my homebrewed campaign, so it played out over many, many sessions. Then I adapted it again for a 4-hour one-shot that I ran at ShireCon. And, as I was making this, first of all, I had to change it in terms of how it unfolds in a campaign setting, and then I did it as opposed to a one-shot. But I also had to remember when I'm doing this that this is going to unfold differently than it does in the book. It's not going to be the same, and it's not going to be the same in important ways that are good. Because I'll start with number 1, which might be the most important, but I think they all have their value. Player agency. Player agency is what's going to drive especially in a sandbox homebrewed campaign. They're the ones that make the decision as to where the narrative is going to go. So you've set this whole thing up like I did with the Heart of Darkness, crazy guy up in this river and he's gone mad and everything. The players, first of all, have to decide, do we want to do this, right? Are we interested? You can't force them. I mean, you can, but that's railroading. So once they decide to do it, then they go up. Well, you may have clues set up, or you may have that information. They may not go there, and they're going to drive it. And then when they get there, they're going to make the decision about what to do. Because in a novel or in a film, one person or many, let's say in a film, but and again, most novels are written by one, but sometimes two, they're making all the decisions. The person who's writing the story. They're saying that, Conan goes here and then he goes here and then he does this and then he goes back here and he fights this and it's just happening. I'm just reading along. That's not the way an RPG works. So even though you may want them to reenact the plot of the book or film you're adapting, that's not it shouldn't happen. They should decide what they're going to do. And another element here is failure is an option, right? Now you do have, people may comment and say, well, this book or this film, the hero fails. Okay. But most often we expect the hero to win. We do not expect the hero to be killed halfway through the movie or the book. The hero has to triumph. And in an RPG game, the players can lose, not just merely, not necessarily a TPK, but they can be defeated in such a way that actually things become worse than they were when they started off. They screwed something up. And that's how the story evolves. It isn't always. Now, again, you may have players who want this heroic fantasy where they always win. That's okay. But in worlds I run, players can fail. They run away. They screw things up. They make things worse. Like I said, they go to Kurtzen and they join up with him, Colonel Kurtz. I don't know. Or they let him go and he wreaks havoc, or they ignore the situation. Whatever it is, the heroes can fail in an RPG setting, and I think that's what makes it so great. Another key element is the way the information flows to the reader of the story, which is the players, since the players aren't reading, right? The novelist just tells you, just read about what's going on, the inner thoughts of the characters, and if it's first person or third person, omniscient or whatever, you're not getting any of that. You're describing as the GM what the surroundings look like and what the players are seeing, but they're investigating. Everything has to be presented to them, either just at what they see around them or then when they explore the world. And then other things could be ignored. Some critical information, the players don't go there to investigate that. They're not going to get it. And you as the reader are not going to, be, oh, it's too bad they didn't go check out that chest because that had the critical information, or search that body. If they don't do it, it's not coming. And here's another really important one, pacing. Your pacing is flexible in an RPG game, right? Oftentimes, depending on the sort of thing, but typically a lot of the books or novels or whatever that you adapt to, let's say they're fantasy films or something, they have a pacing that just goes from here to here to here, and it can either be at breakneck speed or pretty quick, but it just moves along, whether it's a 2-hour movie or a book or something. I mean, I've read fantasy books that take forever, and everybody out there probably knows the ones that we all have are the ones we think about. This is going on forever. But the pacing in an RPG book is totally flexible. The players, they go here, they explore, they look at something. You're running sessions that are 2, 3, or 4 hours. They want to stop and perhaps, rest and level up or something. And, you can put them on a ticking clock. You can try to force that. But again, that pacing, if they go in to explore some area, that may take an hour of game time, which something in a film or a movie would take, a paragraph. And so the pacing of how soon we get information, and then we have sessions go by and people forget things, right? Because the pacing is so much different. You just have to be aware that this is going to take place. You got to think about, well, if they have a battle here and they go explore this and they try to solve this and then they have to go back here, that's going to take time. And that's not necessarily all the players are going to be asking you questions about things. They're all trying to have their say here, and it's not a single protagonist, right? It's multiple protagonists. And this brings us to our next one, which is the spotlight must be shared. You have multiple players, each of them interacting with you. It's not a single protagonist like a Conan thing. Yeah, he has sidekicks and stuff, but he's number one. And most films, a spy movie, venture films, whatever, you have one central character that's really leading the way. Not in an RPG setting, unless you're running a campaign, the duet campaign with one person. But most of the time, you've got players. So you got to recognize that. They're going to be coming from different angles, and they're all going to contribute, and they're all going to want to feel like they're part of this story, not a single protagonist. And those protagonists, you have a different power balance, typically, in an RPG setting. Conan, we expect him to win, but we expect him to be, or if he is way more powerful than his enemies, he fights off 10 guys, we expect that. The players, if they're going to fight off 10 characters, that could be boring. I got to go through and just these hit point bags I got to kill. That's not interesting. We want opponents that, again, I've talked about this. If you go into the swamp of infinite evil, it's probably unbalanced. You're in trouble. And if you hang around farmland, anything you meet, you can kill. You get in trouble for it, but right. So again, you have areas that have this balance, but typically for an adventure, the players want to feel that this is a challenge, but it's not impossible, but certainly not oftentimes. Again, when the person in a book comes to the supervillain, yes, it can be unfair. But we always expect them to, pull something out of the bag or have some power that's, too much for the villain. Not necessarily the case when you have an RPG game. And related to the hero always winning or being overpowered, when those battles in an RPG game, battles and combat are interactive. They're not descriptive. Right. So if Conan goes, and Daniel Norton and I in our podcast were talking about this, he jumps on the snake and he's fighting and the snake's trying to constrict him and he takes its head and he rips it open and kills it. That may take a paragraph. That may take, no time at all to read, but to play it out, because you're going to confront it and the snake's going around, it hits him with, maybe it's got a tail and it's trying to bite him and he's weaving and then he jumps up on there and everything. All that is going to take rounds of action because it's an interactive process. And you want that interactive process to include tactical decisions the players make. They're not necessarily going to jump on the snake and rip its head off. They're not necessarily even going to fight the snake if they decide the thing is too powerful. And then finally, the mysteries and the puzzles have to be solvable. Very often in a film, we will see the hero solve some mystery puzzle, a riddle or something. And if we're being honest, we're thinking, how did they figure that out? That's complicated, right? And yet they do figure it out because the person that's writing it out says they figured it out. But in real life, with real players, you may present mysteries, you may present puzzles and conundrums that the players can't figure out. And you have to be prepared for that. That's why you have to give them clues. You can't make them overcomplicated because they'll just get frustrated if they can't solve the mystery. They can't figure things out. Again, and you got to play your group. Some groups love puzzles. Some groups hate them. Some groups just want to fight things. They're not interested in that. But if there's I enjoy it where the players have to figure out now who do we trust here and how do we find that out and how do we determine it. And if it's just impossible for them to do it and they just end up doing a coin flip or something, that's not very satisfying. Now, because you might have a story where someone does that, but most often they solve the puzzles. And all this stuff gets back to the idea that we're not reading a book, we're creating a story together. And in the process of creating that story, we need to keep in mind always how different an RPG game setting is from a film or a book. And a shout out to my Patreon supporters. As I said, I gave them the Dennis Hopper character from Apocalypse Now, turned into a crazy bard. And love to hear you guys what you think about what have you adapted, what novels or films. Like the video, subscribe, all that good stuff. And remember, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.